So this happened a little over 2 years ago, and I wanted to post it somewhere just to look back on it one day and never forget the lesson I learned. Disclaimer, this is a real story, and I wish it wasn't. It was 2016, and I just started a new job at a motel. It was low pay, but I needed an office job. One of my friends, Michael, got me this job. For a few days, I did training with the owner in the mornings. For 2 nights, Michael trained me. Our job was the 11 PM to 7 AM shift. Nothing exciting. Checking guests in and doing paperwork. My boss, who was the owner, went away with his wife on vacation for a week, which is attributed to the swift training I had to endure. So it was my first night alone on the night shift. There was a monitor with security cameras around the motel's property, and large glass windows all around the office building with a glass door. There was no night window like most motels have. It was fairly early in the night, at about 1 AM. I was just doing my normal, checking paperwork, when a man walks in and asks if we have any rooms available. Usually, if someone is sketchy, my boss has me lie and say no, but he seemed normal at that moment. Without hesitation, I said, "Yes, of course, just for one," and he replies yes. So I began creating the reservation on the computer, when I notice he starts swatting the air and making spitting noises as if he's being surrounded by flies. I tried to ignore it. As far as I was concerned, it wasn't my business. So I check him into the room as quickly as possible. I gave him his key, and on his way he went. At this point in time, I could be described as very timid. I had a lot going on in my personal life, so I hope you can all understand my reaction to what happens next. The man comes back from his rooms and slams his hand on the glass door, causing me to jump. Absolutely frightened, I look up to see him just staring at me. He cracks the door and puts his head through and says, "I can't get into my room. Why won't you let me into my room?" And my only defence is trying to be helpful, so I replied, "Maybe there's something wrong with your key. Let me give you another one." The look he had in his eyes was inexplicable. I felt like I was in absolute danger. I handed him his new key, and he went back to his room. I tried texting Michael, because he's the one who trained me. Though it was the middle of the night and he was asleep, I needed some guidance. With no reply from Michael, I noticed the man trudging down the stairs to come back. I go into absolute panic mode. I run into the back office and lock the door, and I pull out my pocket knife. It's important to keep protection when working at night. I hear the man in the office yelling, "Hello? Hello? Why won't you let me into my room? Do you not like me?" Me being an absolute idiot and not standing my ground and calling the police when I'm feeling scared, I decided to take this situation alone. I reply, "I'm just on the phone. I'll be right out." I then start calling Michael over and over for help. No answer. I decided to take a few deep breaths and then step out of the office. The man was not there. He was in the bathroom. I start hearing him talking to himself, angrily saying, "Killer, killer." My heart sank. Still being an idiot and not calling the police, he comes out and I say, "Your key was broken, I'm sorry. Let me escort you to your room." He agreed, thankfully. I was wearing a long sleeve sweater, so with my arms down, I was able to hide my knife in my hand while holding it. I began to walk outside, and he seemed insistent to walk behind me. We began making our way to the staircase and up towards his room. I was sweating from how nervous I was, continuously looking behind me to make sure he wasn't going to make a move. He stops at a room, and I stop at his room a few doors down. I smile and say, "Oh, that's the wrong room, this is your room," as it clearly said on the door. The whole time he was going to someone else's room and try and open the door. I felt bad for him. I quickly ran back to the office and locked the door. The next guest I checked in was a police officer from a few towns away. I felt bad for confiding in them about the guy, but they seemed willing to keep an eye and ear out. The next night, the man came back, but I had the doors locked and told him we were all booked up. I explained to my boss what happened when he got back from his vacation. However, he didn't take me seriously. I continued to work there on the night shift for the next year, where many other strange encounters happened. So, strange man, let's never meet again. If you ever feel uncomfortable, always call the police. I'm shaking right now. I feel like my fingers are going to fall off if this keeps up. Yeah, I can't keep this to myself any longer. It is coming for me. And when I disappear, no one will ever know. I'll vanish without a trace, and the world will never know what happened to me. God, please. I know I don't go to church. I'm not a Christian. But what if they say is true and you do exist? Please save me. Please bring my mum back. I'll do anything. It began only days ago. Or not. It feels like it's been months, maybe years. I don't entirely know. My perception of time seems non-existent now. So much so that I've become completely unreliable. I don't trust the date on my phone, nor on this computer. It's jumbled and twisted, like her. These words, as I type them, seem to skew and distort. It follows the carrot as it moves, just like how she follows me. My parents went out on a bike ride together. They got along well, rarely ever fighting, and they often went out together to exercise. I was perfectly happy to stay at home, keeping an eye on the stray alley cat we sometimes let in when it was cold, and amusing myself on YouTube or working on my book. My book will never be finished now. All of the things to make me cry, that had to be it. This time was wrong though. I heard the front door open, and I saved my project. And when I left my room to greet them, my dad was limping, blood smeared his brow, and he was bleeding from his elbows. I asked what had happened, and my mum answered for him. He fell off his bike. That voice, it was certainly my mum's, but she sounded odd. The soft tones that I'd grown used to over 18 years were completely gone. Even when she was angry, her voice was still characteristically sweet at its core. I asked if she and my dad had fought, thinking perhaps that might be the cause of my confusion, but my mum told me that they hadn't. My dad smiled at me and told me not to worry. But while he seemed like, well, himself, his voice was strange, and his usually tan skin was atypically blanched. That was not put me off, however. When I followed to help bandage the open wounds on his forehead and elbows, which were rather minor in comparison to whatever internal damage had caused his limp, he didn't protest. He just followed behind me wordlessly as I went to get the band-aids and neosporin from the medicine cabinet. My dad never let my mum nor I take care of him that way without some verbal back and forth. My dad was kind of stubborn like a mule. He would always tell us not to fuss over him, though we inevitably would. My mum just stood there watching us, making no move to help my dad at all. He was limping, for Christ's sake. She would have never let that slide without checking to make sure his bones were all intact. They must have thought that was the only reason I could think of for them to be acting like this, especially my mum. My dad's behaviour worried me more though. He wasn't the kind of person to act so fragile. I wish they'd only been fighting. I wish that more than anything now. I hate when my parents fight, but at least they're both themselves when they do. God, I'm going to cry again. But I have to finish this. I have to keep going before it's too late and she catches up to me. Over the next few days, or perhaps weeks, I noticed little things were off. My mum didn't call me by my nickname at all, and she almost always did. When she used terms of endearment for me, they sounded forced, like she was reciting them through gritted teeth. I thought she might be on a period or something. I did everything to explain away the unusual behaviour. Maybe the stress of at-home college was finally getting to me. Sure, that had to be right. My dad though, he looked more and more like a ghost every day. There wasn't even a trace of a tan on his skin, and he was still going to work at the construction site. He was under the sun all the time, yet it didn't make a difference. He grew fainter, until that gruff love I knew to expect from it had transformed into something breakable and wispy. He looked at me like he barely recognised me, beyond the signals of his brain telling him that he did. Then, I found out why. It was feeding on him. My mum, no, whatever creature had impersonated my mum, was feeding off of my dad. A vampire. Something else. The hell if I know. All I know is that, one day, I told my parents I was going out. I should have noticed the pleading in my dad's eyes, even when he smiled and waved at me as I left. I should have seen the terror that he could not express in words. I remembered it only when I quietly snuck back inside through the back door, wanting to see exactly what was happening while I was gone. God, I'm still reeling from it. A house is only one level. There's no stairs to climb. And when I peered past the half-open door, I saw something that will haunt me for the rest of the little time I have left. She was on top of him. A beast that looked like my mum but was bigger. Her body seemed to dwarf the king-size bed and far stronger than my dad. Her skin was tight to her gigantic bones and her spine curved at an unnatural angle as she leaned over him. Long-fingered hands cradling my dad's head. These animal claws of hers dug into his skin, and her pellucid tongue, which was long and spiked at the end, slithered like a snake into his mouth and down his throat. I nearly threw up. Even thinking about it now makes me want to vomit all over myself. My disgust and terror only increased when thick, red blood, Dad's blood, travelled up the translucent tube with such a repulsive sound. I don't know what the hell to do. What could I have done? I backed away, trying to keep my heart from leaving my chest. It was pounding so hard. I know that I should never have stood there for as long as I did. I should have started running, but my feet felt like they'd been glued to the floor. My hands are fixed to either side of my head in panic as my back pressed against the opposite wall. When the gulping noises abruptly stopped, I knew I was fucked. I looked up, and her eyes were on me. My mother's face, attached by a skeletal neck to that colossal body. Those yellow eyes captivated me like prey. The door opened on its own. She picked up my dad's feeble body in one gigantic hand and threw him at the feet like a rag doll. He depleted form, making a thud on the ground. He was breathing, but barely, and his eyes glazed sightlessly forward. I fell to my knees, holding him and sobbing like I've never sobbed before. He was dying. This thing had killed my dad. Then she spoke. In my mum's voice exactly. Now, with the soft tones I knew. "You will be him," she told me. I could not see her, it, through the tears. I didn't want to. I wanted to wake up. "You will taste sweeter than he did. You were young. I will make you last." I heard a screech and the tears fell from my eyes, cleaving them but for a moment. I saw my dad's arm holding her own at bay. With an impossible surge of final strength, his face looked more alive than it had in what felt like forever, and through no sound left his mouth, his lips said, "Go." I did what he asked. I ran. I flung the front door open and ran out, but I nearly fell when I heard the horrific, crunching noises and my dad's gasps of pain right behind me. I ran for so long, never looking back. I'm at the library now. I'm on a public computer. This was the only site I could log into. The words are jumbled and the world around me is darkening quickly. I live near a police station, but when I went there, the building was simply gone, like it had never existed at all. I've tried to contact my friends, my family, 911, but I can't get hold of anyone. When I do get messages, they're from her. She says she's getting closer, how she can't wait to use my body and bleed me dry. This must be a horrible, horrible dream. It has to be. It has to be, please. Oh God, she's here. This week's shout-outs go out to Jacqueline Vrooman, Janice, Brandon Vella, and Frightful Feelings. Thank you for the support.